I'd like to introduce Mr. Warren Martin, and let's give him a warm Pachyderm Club welcome.
Well, good afternoon. How are y'all doing today? Good. Today is going to be a shocking day for some of you because I am not a political guy. I am an energy guy. I talk about energy. I talk about where we're at, what we have, what we don't have, where we're going, what the ramifications of the decisions that we're making are. And today we're going to talk about energy and poverty. And energy and poverty is a major issue. And if you've never heard that term before, get used to it. Over the next 10 years, I believe it's going to become even more of a major issue going forward. The greatest danger to our environment moving forward as a society, the greatest danger to our environment is poverty. If you go anywhere where people are living in poverty, look how they treat the environment. They do not have the means, the ability, the extra time, the extra money to be able to handle the environment, even in a moderate way within their realm. And so energy and poverty has a direct link. When you look at energy and poverty and you look at poverty rates that are occurring in the world as a whole, you see a direct correlation to affordability of energy and how much poverty is in those areas. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today because it's a real issue, not just on a world scale. It is a real issue right here in Kansas right now. And so we're going to kind of take a look at it. But before we take a look at it, I need you to kind of reframe how you talk about things. I need you to reframe how you look at things. Because we have a tendency, especially those of us who are involved in political circles, where we learn the taglines, we learn the talking points, we learn all of those things, and we tend to think about things and say things the exact same way over and over and over again, even when we might not fully understand what it is that we're saying. And so I want to challenge some of those ideas. I want to challenge some of those things to maybe have you think about energy, especially in correlation to poverty, in a little bit of a different way. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to start by talking about recycling. So in the room right now, by a show of hands, how many of you out there actively participate in recycling of paper in your offices, in your homes? You actively participate, okay? Which is not an uncommon thing, about half the room. Now the question is, why? Why? Why do we participate in recycling paper? For most people, the idea of recycling paper is the idea that recycling paper is the bare minimum that you can do to help take care of the environment, right? If you care at all about the environment in any way, shape, or form, then you're going to recycle paper. However, if you were to go, it's not up there now, but it was during the Obama administration, it was the first time that I learned about this. If you were to go to the United States Forest Service during the Obama administration and look up their information on paper production in the United States, what you would learn is that recycling paper is actually more damaging to the environment than using new paper that comes from new pulp. Now why? Why? Because when you create new paper from new pulp, you go out, you cut down a tree, you turn it into pulp, you make a piece of paper, you print it out, and you put it forward. When you recycle paper, you have to go out and collect the paper, bring the paper to a collection distribution, sort the paper. When you get the paper sorted, then you have to tear down the paper, chemically infuse the paper to be able to break it down back to a pulp state, and then create the same piece of paper that you were going to create in the first place. It actually takes more energy, it produces more greenhouse gases, and it's less beneficial to the environment than using brand new paper. Yeah, but what about the trees, right? What about the trees? I've already had someone that came in here, I'm not going to mention any names, Todd, but it came in and was like, I think we should plant more trees. And the reality is we've done that. We have planted more trees. I'm going to blow your mind right now. Do you realize right here in the United States right now, we have more trees in the United States than we had in the 1700s? More trees in the United States now than we had in the 1700s. Now, a lot of people are like, wait, how is that possible? Well, look out the window. You go back to the 1800s, none of those trees were there. Not one of those trees were there. Here in Kansas, you see a tree, you see where someone's been. You see where someone's been or someone's been close to there and those trees try and trail off. They do grow and they do spread. But we have more trees in the United States. But it's not just here in Kansas. It's all over the United States. I want to take you to Billings, Montana. Billings, Montana in 1895. This is Billings, a picture from Billings, Montana in 1895. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that beautiful? Here is Billings, Montana today. We have more trees in the United States right now than we did in the 1700s. In fact, trees in the United States are grown as a crop. They're grown on a 15-year rotation. They put out a crop, they grow it for 15 years, they harvest the crop, they pull up the stumps, they plant a new crop, they grow it for 15 years, and they do it over and over and over again. There's no deforestation that is taking place in the United States for the production of wood, for the production of trees. We grow them as a crop. And that means that the average paper companies in the United States, they plant on average 1.7 million more trees every year than they harvest. We have more trees in the United States than we've ever had before. And that's kind of a problem. You know what the number one producer of methane is in the world? Anyone want to guess? Most people would say cows, but it's actually rotting wood. In fact, Kansas is notorious because the very first scientist that ever figured that out came from the University of Kansas in 1909. In 1909, they were cutting down a famous cottonwood tree that was on the campus of the University of Kansas, and a professor went out. I can't remember his last name. I should have looked that up. But he went out and he set up cameras to video this tree being cut down. When they cut down the tree, he had cameras all around it, and the trees picked up vapors coming off of that tree. He went back and studied those vapors and figured out it was releasing methane because it was decaying. All carbon-based creatures, all carbon-based organisms that live on the world, when they decay, they produce methane. The biggest producer of methane in the world is our rainforest. It is our trees. And especially here in the United States, when we've taken policies where we no longer go in and clean the underbrush that is underneath those trees like you have in California, which not only leads to wildfires, it leads to increased methane production. In fact, the very policies that everyone says are there to prevent environmental impact are actually causing the greatest environmental impact that we have out there. Because we have adapted. We have adapted. And we have answered those questions. We have figured out how to stop deforestation, how to plant more trees, how to put more things out there. And so I want to challenge you on that because most people, when they have this idea that recycling paper, that's a no-brainer, right? But it actually hurts the environment more than using new paper. So you take that same line of thought and take everything that you've learned about energy, kind of put it on the back burner, and go with me for just a second, and let's take a look at energy and poverty from a new perspective. Not from the perspective of windmills and energy policy and the National Petroleum Reserve and all of those things. Let's take it from a human perspective. Let's get back to humans, people that are walking around this earth. What are they going through? Okay, and let's take a look at energy and poverty. So, one of the things that I've been privileged to do is over the course of my career, most of my career has been spent in ministry where I would go into corporations, predominantly Fortune 500 companies. I would do personal growth and development, think outside box, problem solving, conflict management, motivation, those types of workshops in Fortune 500 companies. I would use all the money from doing that for 9 months out of the year to then take 20 to 30 kids overseas to do building projects as a mission. And I've built buildings in 28 countries around the world. One of the places that I went was a country called Pakistan. And Pakistan is a very energy-deprived country. Very energy-deprived country. There's very little refrigeration. And so when I would take these kids in, I had the responsibility. I would take 20 to 30 American and Canadian teens into the country of Pakistan with me, put them together with 20 to 30 Pakistani teenagers, and we would start doing a building project, which means if you've ever been around teenagers, they like to eat. And so every morning I started out the same way. I would go down to the butcher shop to pick out our meat for that day because you had no refrigeration. So whatever meat you ate that day, you bought that day. And I would go down to the butcher shop. When I went down to the butcher shop, I didn't pick out these steaks and these, hamburger meat. And it wasn't like that. I went down and I said, I'll take those 10 chickens and I'll take that goat. And they would start slaughtering them right there in front of me and start processing them while I was sitting there waiting. While they were processing that, I would then walk across town and I'd go down by the river where the ice house was. And we'd buy a block of ice that would be about this big, about that tall, and we'd wrap it up in burlap, put it onto the back of a wagon that would be pulled by a water buffalo, and then we'd start going back across town to pick up our meat so that we could start the day. I did this every single morning. I noticed every time I do that, I'd pick up the ice and these kids would start following in behind me. As these kids started following in behind me, I was like, what are these kids doing? 6, 7, 8-year-old boys that would be following the cart behind me. One day I finally figured it out. As we're sitting there and we're walking back towards to pick up the meat, the water buffalo defecates on the ground. For those of you who came from KU, that means pooped. The water buffalo, just kidding, I'm just kidding. Well, K-State's an ag country. I figured you'd know that, okay? So, I'm from Texas Tech, so. So anyway, you start walking back, this water buffalo defecates on the ground, and that's when the mayhem began. All of these kids that were following in behind, they started racing, running to the side of the road, grabbing grass up off the side of the road. They'd pick the grass up off the side of the road, and they raced to see who could get to the buffalo patty first. Whoever got to the buffalo patty first, they reached down, picked it up, and they started mixing the grass in with the water buffalo patty. And then they started walking home, and I followed them. And they walked home, and as they walked home, they went all the way home, made it into a flat patty, and on the south side of their house, they slapped it on the wall and put it on the side of their house, just like in this picture right here. These are all water buffalo patties that have been slapped on the south side of the wall. And they let it sit there and they dry in the sun. And when it dries in the sun and dries enough, then they're able to go and pull it off the wall. When it starts peeling off the wall, they pull it off the wall, take it in the house. That's what they're going to cook their meals on, and that's what they're going to heat their homes with. These kids have absolutely zero chance of competing with my kids and my grandkids that are living here in the United States, because while my kids are learning about tablets and computers, and they're learning mathematics and arithmetic, and they're learning English and science, and they're learning all these things, these kids are out every single day collecting energy for their family. And it's not just in Pakistan. Do you realize that right now in the world today, does anyone have any idea how much total world energy today is produced by wind and solar? After the trillions and trillions of dollars we spent, how much is total energy in the world that's produced by wind and solar today? Actual number is just under 3%. Just under 3%. Does anyone have any idea how much energy in the world today is produced by firewood? 5%. In other words, if you took all of the wind and the solar that currently exist in the world today and you doubled it, you put up twice as many windmills, you put up twice as many solar panels, renewable energy would almost catch up with firewood as a source of energy in the world today. That's how far away we are from flipping the switch. Right now in the world, 60% of the population of the world today is energy deprived, meaning they don't have enough energy, they don't have as much energy as they'd like to have access to. 40% of the population of the world today still depends on firewood for the heating of their homes, cooking of their meals, or both. Here, this one will blow you away. 20%, approximately 20% of the population of the world today survives utilizing less energy every single year than it takes to run the refrigerator in your home. And they all want energy. It's not just a Pakistani issue. It's all over the world. Here, this is a picture of a major road construction operation that is taking place in Cairo, Egypt, when I was there. And I got out and I took a picture of this. They were building a huge over-ramp. Here in Wichita, we get really frustrated. Well, like right over here on Kellogg right now, they got I-135, the ramp going on over to Kellogg, closed off, and we're like, dadgummit, how long is it going to take them to fix that? Well, in Cairo, Egypt, they're sitting there pouring that same ramp 5-gallon buckets at a time, mixing up their concrete in a big tub like we'd feed our cattle out of on a regular basis. Why? Because they don't have access to affordable energy. Across the world, here, this is a picture from Guatemala. And here in Guatemala, This is where I worked in Guatemala, looking down on a village that I was working at. Almost all of their kitchens are outdoor kitchens powered by propane. The same way you run the grill, that's the way they cook every meal. Every single day. Why? Because they don't have access to reliable energy. Go here. Oh. This is in Guatemala, and in Guatemala, these are tilapia ponds. These are tilapia ponds. Why are there tilapia ponds? Because there's not the affordability of energy, there's not the accessibility throughout the country, and so one of the projects that I worked on was going into Guatemala and teaching them how to raise tilapia ponds, because many of the regions in what's known as the Northern Triangle, you've probably heard of the Northern Triangle. And the Northern Triangle is not all of Guatemala. The Northern Triangle is the mountain area between Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. That's where historically the most migrants or illegal aliens, however you want to call them, that come to the United States have come from that region. It's changing now, but historically that's where most of them came from. Why were they coming from there? Because in the 80s and 90s, there was a huge civil war that was taking place. Up in that region, they grew tons and tons of corn. Literally, throughout the civil war that was taking place in that mountain region, these people were starving to death. They were starving to death eating every single day. Why? Because the mountains that they were growing their corn on had no nutrients in the soil. They had no fertilizer, they had no accessible water, they had no ability to move things. And so the corn that they were growing was growing but had no nutritional value whatsoever. So literally they were eating every single day and dying from malnutrition. And so one of the projects that we did was going into this area and teaching them how to use the available energy that they had to put in tilapia ponds that would start as a hatching pond, a growing pond, and a harvesting pond, where they were able to harvest the tilapia for food, for nutrients, but mostly to harvest the tilapia for fertilization, to be able to fertilize their corn so that their corn would have nutrients so that what they ate would actually be beneficial to their body. Why? Because they don't have energy. They don't have the access to energy. Across the world, there is a huge energy deprivation that is taking place, and it's getting worse. It's getting worse because we have taken on a trajectory to implement and push renewable sources of energy, pushing trillions of dollars into renewable sources of energy, saying that they're free, when indeed all that we've seen here in Kansas, our electricity bills have increased by over 50% in the past 10 years. Our rates keep going up. Our costs keep going up. And across the world, energy costs keep going up. Why? Because we keep making huge investments into many of these forms of energy that are not beneficial to the people that are utilizing them. And there's so many people, all of those people, that 60% that's energy deprived, 40% that still depends on firewood, 20% that survives on less than energy that it takes to run the refrigerator in your home. All of them want more energy. So when you look at where is extreme poverty in the world, you find where you would think you would find it in India, Africa, Latin America, across the middle. And that's no surprise to anybody. But there's a direct correlation between that and energy use. Look to where most energy is used per person in the world. Where is the deficiency? The same place that there is poverty. Energy poverty is a real issue. Energy poverty is what is holding back the have-nots from being able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and join the haves. It is impacting us across the board. But it's not just the fact that people want more energy, that people need more energy, the fact that we have a deficiency of energy. It's the fact that that energy deficiency is going to do nothing but increase. Between now and the year 2050, it is estimated that in addition to our ongoing energy needs that we have today, we're going to add 1.7 billion people to the planet. 1.7 billion people to the planet between now and 2050. The more people you have on the planet, the more energy it's going to require in order to meet their needs, in order to move forward. Now, what's interesting about that is the fact that all you hear about in the media is this idea of energy transition. Energy transition. You hear it all over the place. I'm going to make a statement today that may surprise some of you. I doubt it will in this room, but it may surprise some of you. But the statement that I'm going to make is simply this. There is zero evidence that an energy transition is taking place in the world today. Zero. None. The idea of a transition, the actual term, the actual word itself means that if I'm going to transition, I'm going to stop doing this and I'm going to start doing this. That's what most people think about when transition takes place, right? We're going to stop utilizing this and we're going to start utilizing this. That's not what's happening in the world today. What you see happening in the world today is, yes, renewables are growing. They're down here right now. Yes, they are growing. This is the trajectory they're predicted to grow. They're growing. However, look at the rest. Petroleum, oil, and natural gas are growing. Natural gas is growing. Coal, it's dead, right? No, it's growing and expected to grow through the year 2050. Nuclear, it's growing. Hydro, it's growing. In fact, every source of energy available in the world today is continuing to grow. Renewables have not transitioned anything. They have added to the market, but they have not transitioned. And they've added in two ways. They've added nominal energy to the market and extreme cost. That's their benefit. That's what they have added in both of those situations. But all of these are growing and are predicted to grow throughout 2050. In fact, coal, which most people in the United States think is dead, this chart was off because we did not dip this much going into 2020, or we did not dip this part right here at 2020. It actually began to go up because while we began to shut down coal here in the United States, China began to utilize coal as a leveraging tool to be able to go out to other nations. And they went to Pakistan and said, tell you what, we'll give you X number of coal plants and we'll build them for you and install them for them if you'll give us the access to build a pipeline from Western China to Karachi so that we can export our oil out of Western China. And Pakistan took the deal. They went to Africa and they said, we'll give you a coal plant in exchange for you giving us access to this airport for us to utilize. We'll give you a coal plant in exchange for you giving us these precious minerals so that we can develop them in your country. And they're trading energy to get access to nations around the world. The fact of the matter is there is zero energy transition taking place. But what you'll hear in the media to leverage the idea that energy transition is taking place is what you will hear over and over and over again is, but look at the market share they're taking on. Look at the market share that they're going for. In fact, right now, electric vehicles, you're in single digits in electric vehicles, but it's predicted by the year 2035 that there will be 13% of the vehicles on the road that are going to be electric. 13%, up from single digits. Sounds like a transition, right? But it's not. The market is growing. Let me show you how that works. Let's imagine that you have a village, or it's a small community. Small community that's got 10 families. We'll keep it simple. It has 10 families in it. All 10 families have an ICE vehicle, an internal combustion engine vehicle that's powered by gasoline or diesel. They all have an ICE engine that they're running around in. One day, the Smiths decide, we want to go EV. So they take their vehicle, they go down, they trade it in, they bring home an electric vehicle. Now, statistically, we've gone from 100% ICE vehicles to a 10% electric vehicle neighborhood, right? That's what the statistics show. However, the Gonzaleses down the street, they have a daughter that's about to go to college and is working in her senior year, so they go out and they buy another, and they want to buy a cheap vehicle, so they buy an ICE vehicle, so they bring another gasoline-powered vehicle into the neighborhood. And you got the Martins that are living down the road over here. They pick up a second job because they need a little extra money. It's on opposite sides of town, so they go pick up a cheap extra vehicle so if they can bring it in. They buy an ICE vehicle and bring it in, and they start using it. Now you have, in this neighborhood that had 10 vehicles, you have 12 vehicles that are in this neighborhood. One of those is electric. However, and so statistically, when you look at it, you have to say that electric vehicles have taken over 8% of the market share of this neighborhood. But the reality is, there's one more gasoline-powered vehicle in that neighborhood than there was before you began. See how that works? If the market's growing, you can take all the market share you want. Unless you're taking more market share than the growth, you're not transitioning anything. You're just taking some of the extra market that's being opened up. That's what's happening in the world today. In fact, that report I was telling you about, they said that we're going to go from single digits to 13% of vehicles on the road being electric vehicles by the year 2035. That report that came from the Energy Information Administration here in the United States actually went on to say at that point in time there will be more gasoline-powered vehicles on the road then than there are now. It's a growing, expanding market. And the reality is, we're going to need every source of energy that we can find. It is predicted between now, because of the energy deprivation that's in the world and the people that want energy, because we're going to add 1.7 billion people to the planet between now and 2050, it is predicted we're going to need to produce 28% more energy in the year 2050 than we currently produce on an annual basis today. The question we should be asking is not when are we going to transition. The question we should be asking is how in the world are we going to produce 28% more energy than we currently produce? And that report came out before the whole AI explosion, which is expected to potentially double energy usage in the business sector here in the United States. How in the world are we going to be able to produce that amount of energy? This is not the time to be talking about transition. This is a time to be talking about how can we give the most people access to the most affordable and reliable energy that they possibly can utilize. And I argue that that is oil and natural gas. It is the only source of energy on Earth that is as dense and transportable as it is. Do you realize if you've ever been driving down the road and all of a sudden a big old tanker is going by you, and you look over that tanker and on the side it has 3 letters on it, LNG. Liquefied natural gas. You ever seen that? Okay, you see that truck going down there? This is how dense and transportable natural gas is. When you see that truck that's going down the road, says LNG on it, look at the size of that truck. Look at how long you think that you could run your house off of that amount of natural gas. Then understand it's liquefied natural gas, which means when it gets to its destination, it's going to be decompressed and turned back into a gaseous state so that it can flow into homes and businesses and industries to be able to utilize. That one truck, when it becomes gas again, going from the liquid state to the gaseous state, that one truck becomes over 600 trucks of natural gas. No other energy source is as dense and transportable. Nuclear may be more dense, but it's not transportable. No other source of energy is as dense and transportable as oil and natural gas. And the thing about it is you can load it on that truck, you can load it up here in Kansas, you can send it halfway around the world, open it up in Indonesia, decompress it, service the people in Indonesia, and you will have the exact same amount of energy there as you had here. You turn on a windmill over here in Kansas and you send it to Dallas, you have significantly less power by the time it gets to Dallas than it had when it started, because it bleeds off going down the line. If you've ever been driving and listened to the AM radio and drive under a highline wire, you know that because your radio station goes from the energy bleeding off those power lines going down it. It is the most dense, transportable form of energy on Earth, and not only that, but it's also the only source of energy on Earth that also produces other products. It produces everything that we utilize almost every single day, almost every single thing that you're wearing right now. When I go into schools, oftentimes the principal will look at me and say, do we really need you to come into our school to talk about oil and natural gas? And I'll sit around, and I'll look around the room, and I'll say, I'll tell you what, if you can find one thing in here that's not made from petroleum, I'll agree with you, we don't need to be here. I've yet to find a principal who could stump me. Most of the time what they finally come to is there's not one up here, is a piece of paper. And they hold up a piece of paper. And when they hold up that piece of paper, they say, this is made from trees. Yes, it is made from trees. Have you ever taken paper and like curled it over and just kind of looked real close at it? You see that sheen that's on there? That sheen that's on there is a petroleum coating that's sprayed onto almost all paper these days that allows inkjet printing and laser jet printing and ink that comes from an ink pen to dry faster on the page so that you don't have smearing. Remember when we were kids and our ink smeared everywhere and it doesn't do that anymore? That's why. Almost everything we utilize, everything that we wear, everything that we depend upon, utilizes that petroleum. So, I know I got sidetracked, I apologize. But it impacts us. It's not just a world issue. It's not just about Pakistan and India and Africa and all of those countries that are around the world. It's about here in Kansas. Here in Kansas, before the pandemic, and I hope especially you, those of you who are running for political office, this might be a good nugget for you to understand. Here in Kansas, before the pandemic, the average Kansas family was spending about 2.5% of their total income on their energy needs. 2.5%. The average person living below the poverty line was spending on average 8% of their total income on their energy needs. Now, you might think, okay, well, if they're living below the poverty line, they shouldn't be using as much energy. That's not a choice. There is basic life needs that you have to utilize. You have to stay cool in certain times. You have to stay warm in certain times. You have to cook your meals. You have to produce these things. You have to wash your clothes. You have to do those things. And there's the same for every single family. However, when you're living below the poverty line, your house is not nearly as efficient, your appliances aren't nearly as efficient, your car is not nearly as efficient, and so everything, no matter how much you try, is going to cost you more in energy needs, to where the person living below the poverty line tends to utilize as much or more energy as someone who lives in a middle class family who has high efficiency appliances, high efficiency house, high efficiency car. And there's no choice about that. It's not their choice. It's just a fact. And so before the pandemic, 2.5% for the average Kansas family, 8% for the family that's living below the poverty line. Following the pandemic, the state of Kansas came out with a report that showed that now the average Kansas family following the pandemic is spending 6% of their total income on their energy needs. That is a huge marker, because economists have held for a long, long time that the fact of the matter is a 6% energy burden is the maximum affordability of a typical society. 6% of your total income on your energy needs. After that point, you begin to dynamically change how you utilize your funds. You begin to dynamically change how you live your life, because it begins to impact in areas that you're currently utilizing that money for other purposes. It is generally considered that tipping point. Now, before the pandemic, those living below the poverty line were way above that at 8%. Today, those who are living below the poverty line are spending, depending on where they are in the state, between 13 and 15% of their total income on their energy needs. Go ask any church, any nonprofit. The number one thing that churches and nonprofits get calls for assistance with is paying their utility bills. Number one thing. Because if you're going to skip on something, you're not going to skip on food. You're going to skip on your energy needs. It directly impacts us. It directly impacts Kansas, to where those who are living below the poverty line, that rate continues to increase. The divide between the haves and the have-nots in our state continues to increase. Why? One of the primary drivers is accessibility to affordable, reliable energy. For about a year and a half, I've had the best time talking to people, because there was energy news that was in the news all the time. And I don't know if you've noticed it or not, but energy stories have dropped out of the news in the past 30 days. Completely dropped out of the news. Why? Because they're the first indicator. How much people pay at the price at the pump. When they go and they pay and they gas, they get mad at all of us, those dadgum old guys. They get mad at all of us. And that's the first refrain. But you have to realize that when energy goes up at the price at the pump, it's way more than the price at the pump. You have to realize that if you're going to go out and you're going to buy a gallon of milk, that energy price that is impacting you increases how much it costs to deliver that cow to the farm, how much it costs to raise that cow, how much it costs to plant the feed to feed that cow, how much it costs to harvest that feed, how much it costs to feed the cow on a daily basis, how much it costs to go out and milk the cow on a daily basis, how much it costs to package that up, how much it costs to pasteurize it, how much it costs to sterilize it and send it to a grocery store, how much it costs to refrigerate it at a grocery store. All of those little costs add up in that gallon of milk to where eventually your food costs become overbearing. Right now, from before the pandemic till now, our food costs are up 25%. 25%. Our cost for housing is up 21%. It has dynamically impacted. So the stories that we saw on energy, those stories that we saw on energy, they are directly impacting now to where the stories are being dropped off and they're being replaced with stories about housing and stories about food and the cost of food. Why? Because energy is the driver. You go back and look at any major boom that took place in the United States and you will see that there was a boom in energy right before it. Because that's what gives us the ability and the diversification to be able to create those booms. There's a direct relationship. There is a direct relationship. So much so that this is Bjorn Lomborg, and Bjorn Lomborg is not my friend. Bjorn Lomborg wouldn't want to have anything at all to do with me. He would just as soon get rid of all oil and natural gas if it were at all possible, all fossil fuels completely. He is an environmentalist that's at the Copenhagen Institute, but he is one who has come out against renewable strategies that we currently have on the books. And the reason he has is because the main environmental challenge of the 21st century is poverty. And the more that you push for transitional energy, the more you push for renewable sources of energy, the more you inflate those energy costs, and the more you inflate those energy costs, the more people you push into poverty, the more people you push into poverty, the worse the environment gets. And I'm not talking about atmospheric environment, I'm talking about what you're walking around in on a daily basis. If you've ever been to a third world country where there are sidewalks like in Cairo, in places in Cairo, their sidewalks are made from sweeping the trash to the side and then pressing it down and with water and packing it down, and that's their sidewalk. That's not good. It's not good for the Earth's environment. It's not good for our environment as people. And that's what poverty brings about. Poverty brings about those things. You go into any poor part of this of Wichita, and you tell me if their environment's better than ours. Poverty is the greatest threat. And what is driving poverty is the inability to have access to a reliable, affordable energy. That is what enables people to move forward. Back in 2023, there was 1,609 signatories that all signed on to a letter, including 2 Nobel Prize winners that signed on that said that there is no climate emergency. There is no climate emergency facing us. Their conclusion was the greatest energy the emergency facing us going forward is energy costs that drive people into poverty. That was their conclusion. It's not just me. It is going to continue to be. I'll skip this. This is Germany, and Germany probably has done more than any other nation to try and go to a renewable platform, and we're trying to go to a renewable platform. They've decreased their greenhouse emissions, but what happened here? What happened here is the pandemic and the energy shortage that took place from Russia and Ukraine when the war broke out, when Russia and Ukraine took place. So what did they do? Fired up the coal plants, fired up the pipelines, and they brought back their fossil fuels, and you can see what the initial result was. They spent trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars on battery storage capabilities, and in those battery storage capabilities, they've spent more than any other nation on earth. And right now, if you were to go and cut off all of Germany's power because they have so diligently invested in these backup power systems, if you were to go and cut off their energy supply, they could continue to power their entire country for 13 minutes. Trillions of dollars. Last thing I'll share with you, and then I'll shut up. I know that I've been ignoring you because I know you're going to give me the cutoff sign. So the last thing I'll share with you is this. And it's probably one of the best indicators of what I'm talking about when I talk about energy and poverty and how they tie together. Does anyone remember back in the 1980s, there was the Ethiopian famine that took place? Maybe this will spark your memory. We are the world. We are the children. Remember this? Okay, and you had all these campaigns, and they were raising. Don't laugh at me like that, man. I'm doing the best I can up here, all right? They did all these campaigns to raise money for the Ethiopian famine that was taking place. Why? Because hundreds of thousands of people in Ethiopia were dying from famine in the 1980s. What most of you probably don't know is that Ethiopia had its worst famine in recorded history in 2016. Didn't even make national news. Worst famine that ever took place. Why did it not make national news? Because they didn't have anyone that really was impacted the way it was in the 80s. So a lot of people that went and worked in the 1980s and saw the famine that took place there, and they saw the famine that took place in 2016, they were looking at it and they were like, why is it different? Why is it so radically different? They went back and analyzed it. And what they found they found that there was a series of things that came together to make it to where they could accommodate the famine. Number one, they built highways all across Ethiopia so that they could access more of those villages. I don't know if you know this or not, but asphalt comes from petroleum. They bought tons of Toyota trucks that they were able to go up and down those highways to be able to move resources around the country. They were not electric vehicles. They came from petroleum. They put in power stations to be able to move water around the country so they continue growing, powered by oil and natural gas. They put in fertilizer manufacturing places around the country so that they can manufacture their own fertilizer and continue to grow things. I don't know if you know this or not, but fertilizer is predominantly manufactured by petroleum. You have to have natural gas to even get nitrogen out of the atmosphere to be able to utilize it. They implemented all kinds of medical facilities that were able to produce medications in country that they could use in country. I don't know if you know this or not, but over 90% of all medications that are in the world are produced utilizing petroleum. Over and over and over again, they looked at all of these things and the movement of food, the movement of water, the movement of people. Every single one of them was powered by oil or natural gas, to where you didn't even hear about the worst famine in Ethiopia's history. Energy and poverty are going to be a major issue in the next decade. It is going to be a major issue. And the more we push for an immediate transition, the more we push for a renewable future immediately, the more we push for electric vehicles that the public's not ready for and our system's not ready for, the more we push for all of these things, the more we artificially inflate energy costs, and the more we push people into poverty. And the more we separate the haves from the have-nots here in America, all the time looking at them saying, why don't you pull yourselves up by your bootstraps? You want to help people pull themselves up by their bootstraps? Turn the energy industry loose and let them provide affordable, reliable energy here in Kansas, here in the United States, because if we're going to produce it, we want it produced here because we do a better job than any other country on earth. If you care about the environment at all, you want oil and gas produced here and not somewhere else. With that, I'll stop. Thank you.
Warren, right?
Warren,
Are you
yeah.
ready?
Yep.
Okay.
Y'all have a good day.
I can't answer these questions.
You wouldn't do that to me, would you?
No. Okay, questions, raise your hands, and we try to have Pachyderm members first. I'll try to get to you. Keep your hands up. David, you're first.
It's a quick question.
Yeah.
I'm back to methane because I just had to deal with a video in one of the public schools where my grandkids are. So you brought up the methane thing with cows and trees. Is there, okay, the cows in a year produce this much methane and the trees decaying produce this much methane? Is there a stat at all on that?
Yes, there is. Right now, about 90% of methane produced in the world is naturally produced. It's naturally produced by the environment itself. So anytime you hear someone talking about statistics in methane emissions, they're just talking about the 10% that is man-made. And of that 10% that is man-made, your biggest contributors are cows, and your biggest contributors are oil and gas. Not cows, but agriculture. Agriculture and oil and gas. Those are your two biggest ones. What most people don't know is cows actually do not produce the maximum amount of methane from the posterior. They actually produce the most methane from their mouth. They have 4 stomachs, they chew their cud. Methane is released anytime organic material decomposes. So as it has one stomach, they bring it up to chew it to get it to the next stomach. That's when most of the methane from cows is released, is through their mouth. And so, interesting to know. But we're talking about natural, 90% of the methane in the world. We're talking about cows and oil and natural gas and all industry across the board, 10%. And so when we're talking about changing how much methane's out there, the maximum we can change is 10%.
They were showing, what is it, before the flood? It's a 2016 movie, they're showing it in schools again.
Yeah.
It's just a rerun of.
Yeah.
So Warren, we have another question, but could you answer at the mic here?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Lock me behind the podium. This is not good. Not good.
Do you have any knowledge about why the U.S. is so against thorium reactors? We developed them in '79. We're producing them in Southern California. We're selling them to Indonesia and China and India. It's got their own cheapest, safest form of energy.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, Indonesia is going to replace all 50 coal plants with it.
Yeah.
But do you pick up on anything about why they're so against thorium reactors here?
Now, you didn't listen to what you just said. You put the word reactor. And what Americans are scared of is reaction. We don't want any type of reaction. What we know in our heads is nuclear reactor. Here in the United States, we haven't built a new nuclear facility since the 1970s. We haven't built a new full downline refinery in the United States since the 1970s. And so the refineries are generally shut down for environmental reasons. Nuclear was shut down because of the 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl and all of those things we're scared to death of. You can't tell me that our technology hasn't come a long way since the 1970s. And so really the only form of energy out there that could really logistically could replace oil and natural gas in the near future is nuclear. But anytime you put the word reactor in anything, American public's going to be hard to win because there is an ingrained fear in the back of Americans' minds where they're just not interested in looking at it. So,
The energy sector industry has a lot of money. Why do they allow the media to put out inaccurate rubbish about this subject?
yeah, that's a great question, and that's the reason for my job. Is because basically what you have is you have a long history. And so when the environmental movement began in the 1960s, 1970s, really got on its feet and got going, at that point in time, you were right in the middle of the car boom age, and Americans traveling and the motels every 10 miles where you took long trips. And, America was in love with its cars. And so when the environmental movement began, really what you had was major oil companies. You didn't have a whole lot of independents. You had a bunch of majors that were running everything. And you had a tremendous amount of interest and influence and excitement about automobile and transportation. And because of that, it really set up the scenario where the oil and gas industry just looked at it and said, you can't live without us. We don't have to respond to you. And they were right. They were right for the moment. But that movement continued. It would continue a grassroots movement. They got into education. They got into other places and continued to push that forward until finally we're at the point where today you still cannot live without oil and natural gas. You cannot turn it off and keep the society that we have today. You cannot do it. But for the first time in our history, we're at a point where it's conceivable that people would legislate us out of business and then wake up the next morning and go, oh crap, we didn't mean to do that. It's the first time we're at that point, and so now you're seeing where the industry is starting to respond through organizations like ours, through media campaigns, is starting to try and educate people because for a long time it was just assumed that there was a basic knowledge there that really wasn't there.
Okay, it's 1 o'clock now. We're going to ask a few more questions, so if you need to go back to work, that's understandable. Here's
Your presentation was brilliant. This is one of the axes that I grind. I really think that energy scarcity is going to be a problem going forward, not going just based off some of the things you mentioned like AI. I do want to update your information about nuclear. Georgia just put 2 Bulk 3 and Bulk 4 online.
Oh, did they?
Last year, so
Okay.
we do have 2 new nuclear reactors in the United States.
Thanks for sharing that.
It did have a proposed cost of $14 billion and it cost $35 billion, so you can probably add that in there.
Yeah.
They do seem to cost a lot, and I do think that's something we need to circle back around on, and that's one of the issues I think with Kansas is, we have Wolf Creek that has 1 reactor, it's licensed for 3, we could put a couple more on there. Anyway, I'm interested in your thoughts on that. You kind of went over it a little bit, and you mentioned the fear of the reactor name, but having multiple sources, more than just a 2-legged stool, having some nuclear out there would be kind of nice too, and to my way of thinking.
Yeah. So I'm a proponent for any form of energy, and I'm gonna make some of y'all mad right now, and I apologize for that. I'll go ahead and tell you now, you're gonna get mad, so just sit on your hands, all right? But I definitely thank you for sharing that about the 2 nuclear. I was not aware of those 2. I'll have to look into that and check it out. But the reality is we're going to need 28% more energy by the year 2050 than we currently have. We're going to need it. And so I am open to viability of finding that energy in any sector, any source. Because I am a people person. I've been in ministry. I got into oil and gas because I care about people and I want to empower people. And the only way you can empower people is to give them power. And part of that is energy power. And so I am for energy in any source. That includes wind and solar. However, all we want is for renewables to play on an even playing field as all other energy sources. If you can compete, we're all for you. We're all for you.
2 questions. The first one quick is a trivia question. What is the #1 greenhouse gas on Earth? Second, Bill Clinton previously said years ago that it was no longer an energy society or economy. It was now an information economy. I was always wondering, what the hell are we going to run all that information on if we don't have energy? So can you comment on that? I want to first answer my question. What is the #1 greenhouse gas?
People like me just cannot stand when people like you come to our presentations. I'm just going to say that up front. The door is located over here on the right. So I don't know what gas it would be because the reality is when you talk about greenhouse gases, it changes from huh? Well, see, water vapor is H2O, so would that be hydrogen? Would that be oxygen? That's what I'm saying, is once you start separating those things out, because technically anything that creates an atmosphere is a greenhouse gas. Anything that creates it creates it. And some of those gases elevate heat more than others do, but when you look at the history of the world, you'll find there were times in the time of Christ, in the medieval period, that were much higher CO2 rates than we currently have and much higher temperatures than we currently have. And so, the Earth is constantly changing, constantly revolving and moving, but any gas that produces an atmosphere is a greenhouse gas. That's what the atmosphere is.
Thank you,
It's
Warren.
just getting to the right amount of greenhouse gas.
There's always got to be one in the house, right?
There's always got to be
Yeah.
one.
All right.
It's usually the ponytail.
All right. Thank you, Warren. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.